so as promised, here is a video about anaerobic cellular respiration. I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on this. Hopefully it'll help clear up some of the glycolysis things that I tried to keep really simple for you. I'm going to try to go into a little bit more depth on this. And so we'll get into fermentation and what it means to be anaerobic. Okay, so first I'm going to take just a couple of notes here about what it means to be anaerobic. So first off, this means no oxygen. Okay, so an anaerobe is something that can survive with no oxygen. It's very difficult to survive without oxygen because most of the life forms on Earth are oxygen using, and so they use that oxygen to make more ATP, to get more energy, to try to grow and diversify and compartmentalize all of our functions, and that's why you have organs. And so the oxygen provides ATP, which powers life as we know it. So there's a couple of organisms, I say a couple, there's several, but that are anaerobic. The problem is that you're probably not familiar with a ton of them because they're usually single-cell bacteria type organisms. And so they tend to be very, very small, one cell big, one bacteria cell big, which is really small. And they live in places where oxygen is not rich because if oxygen is present, they will die. So just like if we have no oxygen, we will die. If they have oxygen, they will die. So it's a big deal. Okay. Some places where you might find critters like this. Under the ocean on volcanic vents. So volcanic vents, ocean. So like at the bottom of the ocean, there are little fault lines. And so some of those fault lines, when they move, there's magma. So magma is just lava beneath the surface. And then once it comes up through the surface, it's called lava, but when it's below, it's called magma. And so when it comes up and it's got this little, almost like baby volcano, if you will, at the very bottom of the ocean, it creates a ton of methane and carbon dioxide and all kinds of stuff. And so there's no like O2 rich space right around the edge of that volcanic vent. And so that's where places that are anaerobic that's where organisms who are anaerobic like to be, is in those places where oxygen is not rich because they'll die there. Likewise, there's not like a ton of oxygen rich animals in that region because it's so, hard to survive. Sometimes they swim through and they pass by and stuff like that, just like you can hold your breath and blah, blah, blah. But keep in mind, it's very, very hot. It still is like a volcano. It's just smaller. And there's a ton of pressure in some of these places because it's very deep, and in others, it's very close to the surface. So needless to say, places where there's no oxygen. Some places where there's no oxygen are at the bottoms of swamps or bogs, and that mud, it's so like fermented that there's no oxygen there, and that's why fermented plants can exist. So swamps are another good one. So let's put that down. Swamps. So anywhere that isn't oxygen rich. Okay. So let's change colors. All right, let's do this. Okay, so now let's get into what is anaerobic cellular respiration and who cares? Well, technically speaking, yes, the animals that use anaerobic cellular respiration for their main energy source are very small. However, your body does anaerobic cellular respiration fairly regularly. And I know you're thinking, but I breathe oxygen. How is this possible? Because there are times where you starve parts of your body of oxygen. We're going to get into that and help you understand what's happening in your body at those times. Okay, so I'm going to scroll just a little bit. All right, so let's do some formulas. Remember, we're starting with glycolysis. So the step one for anaerobic cellular respiration is still glycolysis. And some of you will say, but Ingle, that's the first step in aerobic cellular respiration. How can they be the same? Because the first step happens in cytoplasm. Bacteria have cytoplasm too. Bacteria do not have mitochondria, which is another reason why they cannot do aerobic cellular respiration. So the first step is the same no matter what kind of respiration you're doing. And so that's very neat that we share that with bacteria. Okay, so in glycolysis, please remember you are taking glucose and you are breaking it apart. And that glyco is that sugar, right? Glycogen, glucose, those things. And lysis means to break it apart. To lyse something is to like laser it off, cut it off, or break it. And so if you have to have something lysed, not like this lyse, right? But if you have to have something lysed, it's usually you have to have it like cut or lasered off. If a cell has to undergo lysis of some kind, it usually like ruptures. So this is where we take sugar and we break it. Okay, so let's do that. Let's draw the formula. So glucose, which is the sugar molecule we're talking about, is C6H12O6. Okay, and that's one molecule of glucose is C6H12O6. So I'm going to write that this is glucose. Glucose, remember, is a monosaccharide. It's a very, very simple sugar, and thus it's really easy to break down. These are not super complex starches or anything. We're talking about a monosaccharide. So it's also your blood sugar, and so this has to be a very simplified form of a sugar. Okay, here we go. So the first step, how do we do this? Glycolysis, we take glucose, we break it, right? So do we break it in half? What's going on? In another video, I made it simple where I just put C3H6O3 and literally just divided by 2. That's not exactly how it works, so I'm going to try to get into just a little bit more complicated process right here. Not by much, so bear with me. Let me scroll. Okay, so what actually happens? Well, it does break in half, right? But it's C3, and then instead of H6, it's actually H4, and then O3, and then C3H4O3. And I know you're going to say, aren't you missing some hydrogens there? And the answer is yes, we are missing some hydrogens there. So keep in mind that while doing this, you are still making ATP, you're still making all these other molecules. And so what is actually happening if we really get into the nitty-gritty? Well, without trying to go into too much depth for the level of understanding that you're required to do it in our conversations, basically you're also making some carrier molecules or some helper molecules and stuff like that. And so what you're actually making is something, how do I write this? I'll just put it in the middle. You're also making something called NADH. NADH. Okay. And as you notice, you can pick up that there's an H there, right? So what originally happens is, let me take you back one. Let me erase this and then I'll show you what's actually happening. Okay, so let me scroll down just for a second so I can explain what I'm talking about. So what actually happens is you start with glucose, right? And so you actually start with more than you think. So you start with, oh, poop. I was starting to do pyruvate. All right, let's reset and try again. Okay, so what you're starting with is you're starting with glucose, which is C6H12O6, right? But you're also starting with more than that. And so you're also starting with 2 of ADP. And some of you know from my story what that stands for, but it's adenosine diphosphate. And so you've got 2 of those. And you also have 2 extra phosphate ions. So we kind of mark it like it looks like pi, but it's really just a phosphate ion. So you've got 2 of those as well. And those are left over in plants from photosynthesis. In humans, we sort of carry those throughout our system, and now we have to do something with them. So what really happens in glycolysis is you turn this into 2 pyruvate molecules, which I'll save you from writing again. Okay, and then plus 2 NADHs. And you're like, but where did that come from? Well, technically over here, you also have a carrier molecule called NAD. And in photosynthesis, you've learned you have NADP, and then it pulls that hydrogen from the water, and now you have NADPH, right? And then it goes to the Calvin cycle and lets it go. Well, particularly in plants, this keeps cycling. So you know about NADP, right? And now I'm introducing you to something else called just NAD. And so what happens is you have these NADs, you actually have two of them over here. And so when the arrow goes across, you get two of those carrier molecules are gifted in H right there. You also get +2 ATP. And you're like, but this is ADP and then these P ions. What are you even talking about? What happens is when diphosphate adds a phosphate, di means 2, and then tri is 3. And so it's like, oh, 2 + 1 is 3. And so what you have here is adenosine triphosphate. And so you've basically just condensed these terms together. So chemically, they rebond. Okay, so anyway, I just wanted to explain where some of those hydrogens are going. I know that like it's not a perfectly balanced equation, but it shows you that the hydrogens that were here that are extra end up over here in the carrier molecule. Okay, let's resume what we were talking about. I just wanted to make that aside. Okay, so these are the actual chemical structures. Basically still pretending like we took a candy bar and we just snapped it in half. It's still a candy bar, right? Like it's still sugary, but now we have half as much as we had before. And basically that's all I'm trying to represent chemically right here. Okay, so in glycolysis, remember no oxygen is present. Glucose goes to pyruvate molecules. So let's write that word right here. So pyruvate. Remember that your teacher or whoever you are learning from may call it pyruvate, and they may call it pyruvic acid. And it doesn't matter either way. Those words mean the same thing. Okay. Also, something else that you need to know is that you have made a magical molecule now called ATP. And so this process is +2 ATP. So that's 2 net ATP. I'll write net. And that means that originally you had to pay 2 ATP to enter glycolysis, and then you actually made 4, and so you net 2 positive ATP. It's like if you have $4 in your pocket, but you have to pay $2 just to get in the door to the concert. You still have $2 positive in your pocket. So it's sort of like that. So we net 2 positive ATPs. We have 2 ATP molecules. So I'm going to write ATPs. There we go. All right, so now what? Are we over or are we not? Well, as far as glycolysis is concerned, yes, glycolysis part is over. But what we're covering today is anaerobic cellular respiration. So step 1 is still glycolysis. However, we continue even further. All right, so let's say I'm a bacteria that does not survive in the presence of oxygen. I've got my 2 ATP. Cool, that's all the energy I'm going to make. But do I just stop with pyruvate? No, I do not. Okay, so let's talk about some common things in your life that you've probably heard of that go through anaerobic cellular respiration. One of them is you, so let's start with that one. Okay, so the beauty of anaerobic cellular respiration is that it's really easy. So I always love trying to, learn complicated things, but occasionally it's nice when they just like give you one that you can understand without trying a lot. Okay, so you take that pyruvate, and let's say we're in the human body, right? So I'm going to go over here for a second. If we are in humans, all right, so let's pretend for a second that we're inside the body, inside of a muscle, right? We're in there, we're looking at it. I'll give you some activities. You decide to go jogging, right? You're like, do. I feel good. I'm going to pick up the pace. And you start running really, really, really fast. Really, 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 really fast. Okay, so a couple of things you're going to feel, right? And the same thing happens when you do jumping jacks. Or in our class, something that we talk about a lot is a fast way to make a chemical we're going to talk about in a second, but doing wall sits. So sitting in a chair position, but against the wall. So you put your legs in a 90-degree angle and you sit like your body is a chair, that will make lactic acid, which is what we're going to talk about very quickly. If you do a plank, right, you can do a high plank. So you get on the ground. A high plank, you put your hands like this on the ground, like you're going to do a push-up, except you don't ever do that. You just stay there. Now the back end of you is making a straight line, and like a wood plank, like a board, and you're like this, and your toes are on the ground, right? So you're pointing up like that. Your toes are holding you up, and then your hands are holding you up here, and you try to hold perfectly still. Your abs will start shaking so fast, and you will feel the burn, right? And so those are both two ways to experience lactic acid really quickly. Back to running. If you're running really, really, really fast, or you're running for a long time, or you're running up a hill, what's going to happen is you're going to notice some changes in your body. First, you're going to be like, right? And you're trying to breathe, and you're realizing that like your breath is pretty rapid, and you're like, I don't think I can keep up with this breath. And then you realize, oh my goodness, my heart's like da 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 da. At this point, if you're doing cardio, your heart's probably above 100, I would assume. Remember, it's not really safe to stay elevated above 170, 175 for very long. You need to stay below that number. So if you're in the cardio, burn zone, still please don't exceed 175. You are at risk of like actually damaging your heart or having it malfunction. Okay, so what's going to happen is your heart's going to beat faster. You're going to start sweating unless it's freezing outside, and then you still might start sweating. And then you're realizing that you can't keep up with your breath, right? And then all of a sudden your legs start burning and your abs are burning, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the worst. Or you're one of those people that love running and you're like, this is the best. I don't understand you people, but I appreciate that you exist. Okay, so what is it? Or if you're in the weight room, right, and you're like, and you're squatting, or you're, lifting, or you're trying to curl, anything that you're trying to do, and your coach or whoever your trainer is like, feel the burn, and you're like, what does that mean? And then your body starts burning. What is that burn? So in humans, we take pyruvate, right, and then we have starved ourselves of oxygen in our muscles, and we make something called lactic acid. Okay, another term for that is lactate. Whoops, there's a C. Lactate. What is it? It's just a chemical that forms when you've starved your body of oxygen. The chemical formula for it is one that you should be very familiar with. So the chemical formula is C3H6O3. So in our bodies, let's go back and fix it since we're just talking about humans. In our bodies, instead of donating a lot of that to carrier molecules and so on and so forth, we get to keep ours. And so we do break it as C3, sort of H6O3. We sort of kind of just do a direct chain. It's like da-da-da. And so we go to pyruvate very quickly and then recontribute those extra hydrogens back to making lactic acid. So those NADs that we were talking about, they just carry it back to lactic acid and then redeliver those hydrogens that we originally had removed. Okay, now let's discuss lactic acid as a whole, as a substance. Okay, if you've ever worked out, if you've ever gone running, if you've ever tried to do anything aerobic, right? Like the field of aerobics, right? The exercise that's going to starve you of oxygen or require the most oxygen of you is called aerobics for a reason. Cardiovascular workouts require a lot of heart pumping, and your heart and lungs are tied together, and so it requires a lot of everything. So what happens when you make lactic acid? Is it harmful to your body? Is it helpful to your body? Is it something to worry about? Lactic acid is a warning system for your body, honestly. And so what it's telling you is when you start to feel the burn, you're sort of exceeding the point where your body feels comfortable. And so if you cannot take in enough oxygen to repay that oxygen debt that your lungs and your bloodstream have from that cardiovascular activity, then what happens is you start making that lactic acid. Now, in your brain and in your mind and in your body, when you start feeling the burn, there's only so far you can really continue feeling the burn before your muscles will have muscle failure. because your muscles and the blood in them need oxygen to kind of keep going and be healthy. So at some point it will start to hurt so bad you will stop. Okay, there's no power through. It's like once the lactic acid gets to a certain point, you'll quit because the pain is pretty severe, right? Now, how do you know if you've ever experienced lactic acid? One, trust me, you'll know. But two, let's talk about what it feels like. All right. The best way I can describe the feelings of lactic acid are, one, if you're feeling it in the midst of a workout, like a wall sit, the thighs, right, your quads and all of those, they start to feel hot. Like literally they feel like inside your legs, it's hot. And you're like, what is that? That is a weird sensation. And then all of a sudden it feels like something is hurting pretty badly. And you're like, oh, that is bad. That is bad. And then it hurts worse. And you're like, your brain is telling you, whatever you're doing, stop doing it because you're feeling pain. Stop it. And really your brain is saying, hey, dummy, like, human, you're starving your muscles of oxygen. And in order to be healthy, your body needs oxygen in your muscles. Stop doing what you're doing. Take a break, catch your breath, and then keep going on whatever exercise thing you're doing. It's like our body's warning system of like, hey, take a break. And trust me, it's a very powerful motivator to take a break. All right, let's talk about the day after a workout. How would you know if you worked out hard enough to make lactic acid yesterday, right? Oh, you'll know. So let's take squat day, right? You're getting low, you're getting that 90-degree angle with your quads, right? Or you're trying to do, without weights, you're trying to do sumo squats to get that deep fold and that deep burn and start those glutes and start accessing, the calves, the glutes, all of those tendons around those Achilles, hitting the knees. But the sumo squat is hard on the knees, so just be aware of that. Don't put weights on and do sumo squats. It's really not great for you. And so you're down there in the squat, right? And when you're in a squat, your arms are like this, okay? And you're down in the squat and your legs are on fire and you do this a bunch, but you can breathe because you're not going at a pace that's considered cardiovascular at this point. And so you're down. The next day when you wake up, your legs will hurt. Your legs will hurt, your butt cheeks will hurt, probably your lower back will kind of like feel tight. Probably your calves and the muscles around your shins will hurt. And so here's the thing, you'll be acutely aware of this pain. And so as a female, I'll just talk about my experience. Obviously, when we have to pee sitting down. We do not have the ability as females, humans, to pee standing up like our male counterparts. I'm very jealous that you males can pee standing up because after leg day, after squat day, after the day where you do a ton of lunges, I very much wish I didn't have to sit down. And so what ends up happening is if you have to go to school and sit in a chair, and that's regardless of your gender, or if you're female and you're like, I really have to pee. Do I really have to pee? Can I try to push it off? No, eventually you will find yourself in a position where you have to either sit in a chair, or if you're a lady, go to the bathroom where you have to sit down. And when you return your body to the same sort of shape that you were in that caused that pain, so like you were in squats, right? So you were in like a chair position with the bottom half of your body. When you go to sit back down in a chair, or when you go to do another squat the next day, your legs will hurt so bad at first. Why do they hurt? Because that lactic acid that got stored in those muscles is now moving around with increased blood flow. And so those nerves are hitting that acid again. And so it's like, ow, ow, ow. And so you want to stop doing whatever motion is causing those, that acid to touch everything and hurt. Now, here's the kicker. I get asked this question a lot, right? Ingle, it hurts so bad. Like ab day, you do a ton of ab stuff, core work, right? You get those abs tight. You got 4 layers of abs. I bet you didn't know that. And then your best friend makes you laugh so hard and it hurts. And you're like, what do I do to get rid of that pain? Every time I bend, it feels like I'm on fire. Okay, here's the problem. The only way to get rid of it is to stretch it. And stretching it hurts at first. So you need to stretch it very slowly and make sure you're taking big, deep breaths. Some people think they'll look stupid if I try to take big, deep breaths, and they're worried about what their friends are going to think. Who cares? You want to get ripped muscles and you want to quit hurting from lactic acid buildup? You're going to do some deep breaths, right? So what is a good deep breath? So when you inhale, you breathe in through the nose and your belly should push out. A lot of people, when they inhale, they suck in their abs, and that's so weird. It's not how you should do that. So when you inhale, you go, and your belly should be like where you look like when you're trying to pooch out your belly, like you're trying to be like, look like a pregnant woman or something. You're like, look how fat I am, look how big I am, right? And you're pushing it forward. And then when you exhale, you pull those abs in. It's a big, deep breath, and it's a very efficient way to get a ton of oxygen in. And then that big exhale, and you should blow out your mouth and not your nose on the exhale. You're getting a ton of that carbon dioxide out, and that's good because you're replacing it, right? So you can see right here, we've got carbons and oxygens, and you need to kind of remove that and get some of that out, right? So ready, everybody, big belly breath. We go, big belly, big belly. Pull those abs in, and that's called belly breathing. It's beneficial for a lot of things. One, it oxygenates your bloodstream. Well, why does that matter? Well, because remember, this whole time we've been in anaerobic cellular respiration. You've starved your muscles of oxygen, right? And so here we are, you've made this acid because you starved them of oxygen. So when you take those big belly breaths, right, and you do that, what's happening is you're shoving a ton of oxygen into your bloodstream. Your bloodstream goes to these muscles. And what happens when oxygen is present to a molecule that is traditionally anaerobic is it shreds it and it breaks it apart. And you get rid of it two ways. You get rid of it as carbon dioxide and also as water. And that's why drinking water post-exercise, so not just while you're working out, but after you've worked out and the following day, drink a ton of water. It really helps like get some of this trash out of your muscles and out of your bloodstream. So you stretch. So let's do this. So we take a stretch, right? Something like this. A good stretch, how do you know if you're stretching long enough? You need, in general, a good stretch holds for at least 30 to 45 seconds a stretch, okay? So these people that you see like working out and they're like, oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, that's good. You know, and it's like, I mean, yes, you've warmed up your muscles a little bit, but if you really need to like stretch, you need to hold that pose for 30 to 45 seconds at least to really allow your muscles some time to get blood flow in there and get that lactic acid out. Is it going to hurt originally when you stretch? Yes, you're going to activate that lactic acid again because you're pushing blood to that area. It's swelling, right? All these nerves are touching all lactic acid. There's all these things going on. And so, yeah, it's going to hurt to squat the day after squat day, right? But is there an alternate method to squatting? Yes. How to stretch those. It's where you stand up and you grab your toe and you like pull it back behind you. Now, a lot of times if people are getting injured, it's because they're trying to pull the toe with like their opposite arm, like they're trying to pull their right toe with their left arm, and that's not right. You'll screw up your knee that way. So if you've got your right leg and you want to stretch it, you stand up, you take that toe and you hold it in your hand right behind that quad. So you take that toe and you touch it to the back of your quad if you can. If you can't, don't keep pulling. Go to where you feel tension and you feel a stretch and you stop. And then you take big, deep belly breaths while you're stretching. And it is so beneficial, you guys, like so beneficial. If it's abs that are killing you, you do something called the Sphinx or the Cobra. And so you lay flat on your belly and then you push up with your arms again, but you leave your bottom half on the ground. And what ends up happening is like if these are your abs, it pushes here. And so it really stretches those abs really nicely. So there's tons of stretches that you can do for all kinds of things. You need to start small, start with a small stretch. And so if it hurts when you start pulling, stop when you start feeling that pain a little bit, take some belly breaths, and then try to pull it just a little bit further and take big belly breaths if you feel comfortable. And then only stretch it to a point where you feel comfortable. And what's going to happen is at first you're like, ooh, lactic acid, that hurts really bad. And you're like, yeah. And then you take several belly breaths and then you just keep it there and you keep that oxygen going to that muscle. And guess what? That acid leaves. And so usually within, a couple of hours or another day, you won't be sore anymore. What happens if you don't stretch? Because you're like, is this worth it? You're kind of rambling a lot about stretching. Is it necessary? Eventually that lactic acid will leave on its own. Here's the kicker. If you're waiting on that lactic acid to leave on its own, it could take a week for it to leave on its own. It could hurt every time you sit down for a week. It could hurt every time you cough, sneeze, or laugh for a week. And if it's an actual injury, the pain will last much longer. But if it's just lactic acid from working out, that pain will last way longer if you don't stretch than if you just suck it up, buttercup, get it over with, and stretch the next day. I get a lot of questions here, especially from athletes, about should I stretch before a workout or should I stretch after a workout? Should I do both? Like, what's the protocol? One, I'm not an expert on exercise science by any means, but I do my fair share of research, right? Because I get obsessive. So what I've learned is that more people using statistics as evidence actually get injured if they stretch before the workout. And so people are like, I don't understand. Wouldn't stretching help you not get injured in your workout or your game or whatever you're doing? The easy answer, the simplified answer is no, it doesn't help you at all. Your muscles need to be what they call warm, right? Warm muscles. Get those muscles warm, right? Before they actually can move around and benefit. Well, stretching lightly right before you go do something heavy, like really active, your muscles are not warm. And so more people snap muscles, pull muscles, or tear muscles by stretching when their muscles are not already warm. So how do you ensure your muscles are warm before you're stretching? Basically, if your heart's pumping and you've got some good blood flow, so go take a jog around the block. You just have to go around once, and that's enough to get those muscles going. Do some jumping jacks real fast, right? Remember, a good jumping jack, you go above, right? You can do straight arm jumping jacks if you want, right? Or if your shoulders hurt, you can just do this, okay? And obviously your legs are going too. So if you do some jumping jacks, it'll get that heart going, it'll get that blood flowing, and if that blood is flowing to the muscles, then you can stretch. And so if you're an athlete or somebody who works out, go ahead and do some light activity to get you started. Maybe run on a treadmill if that's your thing. Rowing machines are amazing for getting that cardio going. Anything to get your heart rate up first before you try to stretch. So even with things like yoga, things that people have a low heart rate for. At the beginning, you start with light stretches, like very small movements. And then as you continue, you go on to these big muscle groups and more complex movements because you're still trying to get your muscles warm. Hot yoga is a thing because it gets your muscles warm first. And so a lot of people really benefit from hot yoga where the room is really obnoxiously hot. So as an athlete, go ahead, do a lap around the field or whatever, or, do some dashes, whatever you need to do to get that heart going, and then go ahead and do your stretch. Or if you're doing a workout and you don't really need to stretch, go ahead and do that cardio first, just a little bit of cardio, and then do your workout. And then after your workout, when you're in your cool down phase, it's really, really important for you to stretch in your cool down. One, it's a good time to let your heart slowly and gradually get down. It's not good at all for you to work out real hard and then just stop. That's not good for anybody. So the goal is to keep kind of just slowly walking around, right? If you're a runner and you're a sprinter, it's not good to just stop sprinting. You need to slowly jog and then walk and then stop. If you're a power lifter who's doing really heavy, your heart will also be going. So when you're done, what you need to do is you need to walk around the gym, okay? Do that. Or get some really lightweight, really, really lightweight, or air squat or something, and just sort of cool down that way. So definitely stretch for your cool down. Let your heart have a chance to catch up. Go ahead and stretch those muscles, right? Stretch them out. Give them a chance to get some oxygen to those tissues. And really, the more oxygen you can do, the healthier your tissues will grow. And ultimately, if you're trying to work out, you're probably either trying to get really strong or you're trying to get, really buff and cut either way. you want healthy tissue, because if your tissues and your muscles aren't healthy, they tear and then you're injured and then you can't work out. So either you do it the right way, the healthy way, or you'll get injured and not do it at all. Okay. Sports where lactic acid is more common as like a daily occurrence are cardio sports. Swimming. Bless you, swimmers. I don't understand. You guys are in amazing shape, like the best shape of anybody I can even think of, because swimming is an insane cardiovascular. Like, you use all of your muscles when you're swimming, like all of them. And it's one of the only sports where you literally activate all the muscles at the same time. Other sports, you activate groups of muscles at a time. And it's just like, whoa, swimming, crazy. You guys are in amazing shape. Like, massive kudos to you. Massive. Runners, right? Cross country, track, all of these things. You guys, your sport is cardio. Like, the point is to run. The cool thing is that your resting heart rate gets really, really low. And so heart rates and beats per minute, right? So a lot of healthy people, regardless of age, their resting heart rate is usually in the 70s if you're in like a decent shape. If you're like morbidly obese, or you have a lot of injuries, or you're really stressed out or whatever, your resting heart rate will be elevated in the 80s, or even sadly in the 90s if you're in really bad shape. If you're in really, really good shape, what does that mean? It means your heart rate is low. And you would think low heart rate, like that doesn't sound like a good thing at all. Your heart is so strong, you guys, like so strong that it is pumping oxygen-rich blood all the time, because your heart is a muscle and you've been working it out. So it's not uncommon for runners to have an actual enlarged heart and be bigger than normal, because you work that muscle so much, because the heart is a muscle. And so in those cases, runners and swimmers, lactic acid is an initial part of your training process. For other sports, really, you don't get into lactic acid unless you're, hitting a really big aerobic workout for yourself, or lifting really heavy, or anything like that. You do build lactic acid, but here's the other thing. Once your muscles get used to that level and intensity of activity, you stop making lactic acid because you can keep up, because your heart won't beat as fast. Runners, you've seen this. You figure out that running that really fast minute pace is not 1 minute. I just mean like fast pace is really difficult on you at first. And then, like, let's say you start with a 9-minute mile, right? Which is a decent mile. At first, that's going to be really difficult for some of us. And then the more you train, the more that you'll realize, that 9-minute mile pace isn't hard anymore. My legs aren't burning anymore. Well, good. It's because your heart's gotten used to that pace. And so you can keep up with the oxygen, right? It's not stressing your body. And so then you want to improve your time, and you want to go to like an 8.5-minute mile or an 8-minute mile. And then you start doing activities where you'll produce lactic acid. Same thing with softball, baseball, soccer, gymnastics, for sure. Football, basketball, all of it. Hockey, rugby, all of it. So in those situations, like softball's my background, right? So in softball, you think, okay, well, that's not a terribly aerobic sport. And to be honest, it's really not. You hit the ball, you run for a short distance, you stop. If you're an outfielder, you run a lot. So in my position, I played both center field, and I was the pitcher for Fayetteville High School for a very long time, and for a traveling competitive softball team in the summer. I did this forever, you guys. But what you don't understand is that when you sling your arm, because softball's different than baseball, right? So softball, you sling your arm around in a windmill. What you don't understand is how much lactic acid you're getting in that pec and those traps and triceps and the whole thing. Also, you don't understand like all the muscles and tendons here. Woo! And so after pitching for like an hour and a half, your muscles hurt really bad. And so sometimes you'll still have that lactic acid buildup because those particular muscles are being overworked in that case. And so then you will still very much feel the burn, especially in that back and those traps. And so sometimes you don't think about that. Catchers, you are literally in a squat the whole game. Like, there is no way initially your butt, legs, and back don't hurt. Eventually they get used to that. And so you have to, the more you work out. So if you do catcher drills where it's like down, up, down, up, down, up, down, or in football, you literally do up downs, right? That's what they're called. So you'll feel it. Now, as you increase the level of intensity or you increase the pace at which you do these workouts, you'll feel all of this. All right, I'll shut up about exercise now. Oh, random fact, lactic acid and lactate. Michael Phelps does not make lactic acid. What? That's so crazy. So he has a genetic mutation where his body doesn't produce lactic acid. So he stops at pyruvate and he never continues to make that lactate, that lactic acid. So, like feel the burn. He doesn't feel the burn. And as an athlete or somebody who works out a lot, you're like, oh, that's such garbage. Because it's what kind of keeps you from working out the next day a lot of the times. You don't want to train the next day if your body's in severe pain. But he can just boom, 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 keep going. And people are like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, considering lactic acid is one of your first warning systems, it's kind of a bad thing. He's more than likely than the average person to tear or shred a muscle because that early warning system's not there. However, if you have a really good coach who's very smart about the human body, he'll or she, in this case, she or he, I think Michael Phelps' coach is a man though, they will tell you, okay, we need to stop even if you're not feeling the burn because your muscles are still exhausted. But yeah, he never feels the burn. And I'm so jealous. He has two sisters, I think. Neither of them have the genetic mutation. It's just Michael Phelps. It's just him. So there are some other famous athletes in the world with the same genetic mutation. But what are you going to do? Okay, so let's talk about a separate type of fermentation now that I'm done ranting about exercise. Okay, let's pick green. All right, so let's go over here. So if you're not a human, where's a time when fermentation would happen? It's alcoholic fermentation. So in fruits and veggies, that'll be a good example, right? What happens then if oxygen is not present is that you make ethanol and carbon dioxide. So what do I mean in fruits and vegetables? So how drinking alcohol was invented actually was from people eating rotten fruit, right? Like if you think about wine, people were eating rotten grapes. And so what happens is if a grape falls off the vine and begins to rot, it will actually, in some circumstances, if oxygen is not present, which it's actually kind of difficult to find things where oxygen's really low, right? But still near an orchard or a vineyard or something like that. But let's say it does, like a sealed container, oxygen's not present in a vacuum, right? It makes alcohol. And the type of alcohol that it makes is ethanol. It also produces gas bubbles, and those gas bubbles are carbon dioxide. And so, the alcoholic process is different. Sometimes you add yeast to the mix if you want to do bread. It still releases alcohol and CO2, but that alcohol burns off. It evaporates very, very quickly. And so this is still how you would make bread. It still has to go through a fermentation process. And all of the fluffier your bread is, right? Like you talk about how bread's, this one's really soft, or this one's really fluffy, or it's really, or this one's really dense. All of that is based off of the CO2 that's trapped in it. So if there's a lot of CO2 bubbles trapped in it, it's a very fluffy, big bread. If those bubbles have all been popped out and like really kneaded and worked out, then it's probably a really dense bread because you've popped all the CO2 bubbles that you can before baking it. So all the bubbles in your bread are just, or the space in your bread between the fibers of bread, it's just carbon dioxide that took a while to pop during baking. So this is how alcohol is made, right? With alcohol, you start with a sugary substance, and most people that are doing this, that are brewing or whatever, start with fruits or veggies. So wine is made from a fruit, but things like, I think whiskey is made from a vegetable. I think it's made from corn. Well, moonshine originally was made from corn, I know. So I think whiskey is also a derivative of corn. I'm not sure. And then vodka then is a derivative of potatoes. And so that sort of originated in places that had a lot of rotten potatoes. And I think Russia is like one of the most well-known places for rotten potatoes. And so I think vodka may have originated there. I'm not sure. So point being, there's lots of types of alcohol. Now, people don't realize that I feel like a lot of my students have instantly been like, oh, like drinking alcohol. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, what about other kinds? Same process. So your car and the gasoline, you'll read at a pump, it can be up to 10% ethanol. And you're like, is that good? Is that bad? One, it's not great for your car. But two, let's talk about what it's made of. Ethanol that can be in gasoline, like mixed in, is made from corn. And so that's their version of like biofuel. I love that they want to market biofuel as like this beautiful, great, like this is how we're going to save the planet, the environment. Biofuel is actually super, super bad for the environment. Like the way that we make it right now is actually really bad. Like it actually pollutes more to make a biofuel than it does to actually just get regular petroleum products. So we think we're doing a good thing and we're actually polluting way more by making biofuels. Anyway, either way, that ethanol that can be in your gas tank is coming from corn. Side note, they are trying to make stuff like ethanol and biofuels and stuff like that out of algae, actually, which would be great. But we haven't gotten very far on that yet. Okay, so something that you'll notice is that, Ingle, where's all the ATP? Did you just forget to write it? No, I didn't. You don't make any ATP making lactic acid, and you don't make any ATP making ethanol and CO2. And so all the ATP that you get from anaerobic cell resp is made from the glycolysis part. And so what is the net ATP for lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation? First of all, let's write that down. This one over here is lactic acid fermentation. That's the name of that process if it goes in humans and it goes that direction. Over here, it's alcoholic fermentation if it's in like a fruit or a vegetable substance like that, or if yeast is present, then it goes to the alcoholic fermentation. Just depends on the organism and where you are. So how much ATP is then given? Well, sadly, all ATP comes from glycolysis. And so let me get my face out of there. So all ATP came from glycolysis. Okay. So anaerobic cell resp equals +2 ATP total. And so, yeah, that's why it doesn't provide a ton of energy for your cells. It's part of why your body will kind of stop functioning the more lactic acid that you make, because you're only making 2 ATP with glycolysis. But if you can repay that oxygen debt, if you can introduce oxygen back into that area, then you'll switch to aerobic cellular respiration, and you can, in aerobic, make a ton more ATP, right? Like a ton. So sadly, a lot of anaerobic organisms are very, very small or single-celled, or it's happening in a multicellular organism in a very specific place that they have starved themselves of oxygen for. A substance or an organism that you might be familiar with that does this is the bacterium that does tetanus. You step on a rusty nail. Why rust is there is because that metal got oxidized, which means like a lot of that oxygen peeled off and resulted in rust. And so you step on that nail gets shoved into the muscular tissue or into a tendon. And ultimately it's like sealed in there without access to oxygen. Well, the bacterium tetanus, I forgot what it's called, something tetanus or tetani. Is the species name. But what it does is it starts growing, like it leaves that, it was growing on the surface of that nail, and it like goes into your muscles and your tendons. And that's why you have to go get a tetanus shot after getting cut by some rusty metal. Now, I do get asked the fun question of, so what is tetanus and what happens if I don't go get the shot? Because I hate needles, right? Bad things happen. It starts doing some anaerobic processes inside your foot and it basically starts fermenting your foot, which is like rotting it, which is bad. And so what ends up happening is it actually creates your tissues, it makes them like solidify. And so they look like cement, and it basically like cements the inside of your foot the longer you wait to go get that tetanus shot. And no, this doesn't happen within minutes or even hours. This is like days and like weeks later. But it can completely destroy your entire foot if you don't go get the shot. And basically, what does the shot do? It kind of speeds up letting oxygen get to the area and puts a little antibiotic in your system too. And so it gets in there, introduces oxygen, breaks up that anaerobic tetanus and bacterium tetani, and essentially saves your day. Okay. So anyway, go get a tetanus shot if you step on a rusty nail. Thank you for coming to my random Ingle talk on exercise science and anaerobic cellular respiration. I hope you enjoyed this talk about not having oxygen and feeling the burn. See you soon.